Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Hungerford. I am a registered dietitian and an integrative and functional nutrition practitioner here at Starkel Nutrition. I work with a lot of folks who have difficulties with cognition, attention, focus, whether that be brain fog or ADHD, or they've had some sort of brain injury or something like that. I've worked for a long time in the nutrition space with cognition being a big part of my clientele's concerns. So today we're going to look at some of the kind of basics for nutrition, attention, and focus. As you can see, this is kind of my areas of focus with a little more specificity. I work with a lot of neurodivergence, immune system dysregulation, gut health, hormonal issues, and we work a lot on intuitive or mindful eating, whatever is appropriate. A lot of these things in this little cube here, they all go together for a lot of people. So that's a large portion of my patient population that I work with. A little bit about me. I have a master's degree in health and human performance or human nutrition, and then did further training from the Institute of Functional Nutrition. After I finished my master's degree, I take a very mind-body approach to nutrition. We cannot separate the two. Mind and body work hand in hand, and we have to consider mental health and physical health as the whole individual and bigger picture. I am very fond of an individualized care plan, meaning that no two people have the same care plan and no two people have the same things that work for them. And so a lot of the work that I do with folks is really, if there's a goal in mind, trying to help them achieve that in a way that works for them, using systems that work for them and working with our brains instead of against our brains, because when we work against our brains, it's not a good time. It's not a good time. I also work a lot on coordinating care with other members of care teams, whether that be naturopath or acupuncturist or mental health therapist, psychiatrist, GI doctors, allergists, things like that. I often coordinate with them to make sure that we're on the same page for patient care. And then we also use what we consider a systems approach. So looking at the whole body, looking at the whole person, and finding systems, like I say, that works for the individual. And that's kind of just a breakdown of what I do as a functional dietitian. Sometimes when I tell people I'm a functional dietitian, they don't know what I'm talking about. And that is fair. I don't think it's a term that gets used a lot, so understandable. Most people think of dietitian as maybe they've seen a diabetes educator once or a dietitian in a hospital setting, but we do a lot more. Okay, this is our team, just so you can see all the lovely faces that work in our office. And you can also see kind of all of our different specialties. This is all also available on our website. So if you are thinking about seeing someone and you see something on there that is sticking out to you, go on the website. There's even more information. We all have a bio. They're lovely. We love writing those. So lots of wonderful people on our team. Okay, so today, our agenda, we're going to talk about the connection between nutrition and cognitive function, some key nutrients that can help to support mental clarity and brain performance, what we can add / avoid to reduce brain fog and inflammation, some simple sustainable strategies for improving your brain through food, and special consideration for some individual diagnoses. So at the end, we'll talk about some specific diagnoses and things we may want to keep in mind for those folks. Okay, so when I am looking at assessing an individual, first time they're coming in to see me, what am I looking at? It's a lot. If any of you out there have ever done one of our intake forms, you know there's a lot of information in there. It's because it all matters. It all contributes to the picture of an individual and how their cognition or their focus is impacted by various things in their life. So what do I look at? I mean, obviously dietitian, but there's a lot more. I'm talking to people about their movement practices, their stress levels, their sleep, talking to people about potential needs for advanced testing or supplementation, though I am very kind of careful with those and folks, accessibility to those things. We are in a sort of interesting economic space right now, and so I'm always kind of really targeted with supplements specifically. GI health is a big one that is something I look at. So I ask a lot of questions about, like, do you have reflux? Is there ever abdominal pain, bloating, diarrhea, all of these things. Hormonal, adrenal, and thyroid health. So that's looking at our endocrine system and all of our lovely hormones. My patients have heard me say many, many times that hormones are like dominoes, and when one of them gets thrown kind of out of line, others follow. And so hormones often play a big role in things. Sometimes, especially in Washington, we'll see environmental exposures to things like mold. I've had a few patients that has severely impacted cognition for them, and we have to work with that and trying to abate the mold to help cognition. Self-feeding capabilities. This is kind of the clinical term for, like, how able are we to feed ourselves in kind of a daily routine way? Do you have any limitations? Is standing at the stove or the sink difficult? Do you have difficulty chopping things? Like, those are all parts of the puzzle too. And also contentment. This is a big thing that I talk to my patients about when we're talking about cognition, focus, brain health. Are you having fun? Are you experiencing joy? Because those make a huge difference in helping to clear some of the fog and help us kind of get better attuned with our focus and our brains. We got to have fun. So folks come to work with me a lot. They have chronic stress, inflammation, or an inflammatory disease. I see a lot of autoimmune cases. I see a lot of MCAS, or mast cell activation syndrome. I see a lot of things like SIBO, or inflammatory bowel disease, such as like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. All of these can impact cognition significantly. Neurodivergence, meaning ADHD, autism, OCD. I see patients who've had brain injuries as well, whether that be something like a stroke or a car accident or a concussion or something like that. And then occasionally patients with cognitive decline. I used to work almost exclusively in the senior sector, working with folks who have memory decline, like Alzheimer's, dementia, and helping that. But now I see people most adults of all ages. Okay, one thing I always kind of throw out there is a couple of disclaimers. One being, I am not the food police. Sometimes people kind of think that about dietitians, that we are here to police food and what people are eating and all that. Absolutely not. And also something to keep in mind is that fed is always best. So there's all these recommendations, there's all these things that we can do to help our brains and our bodies function better. But if you were in a situation where none of those things are available, but something else that maybe isn't amongst the things we talked about today is available, we always want you fed, not skipping eating because it doesn't meet whatever criteria we're discussing. So always making sure we're still eating, even if it's not perfect. Perfection is not the goal. Think in terms of what can we add in versus what do we have to restrict and take away, right? So anti-inflammatory diet can be really helpful for a lot of these conditions. Obviously, there are specifics, and working with someone like myself on an individual basis would get you that individualized care plan, but these are kind of the top level things. So eating more plants can be super, super helpful. Aiming for like 50% of your meals to be from nutrient-dense plant food. That helps get not only fiber in our diet, that helps with digestion, but vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, phytonutrients, things that all support healthy cognitive function, healthy brains, healthy bodies, right? Plants are, generally speaking, our friend. Looking for lean sources of protein, so fish, chicken, beans, eggs, nuts, dairy, some red meat. Quality matters in terms of things like red meat, but we do what we can. Starches can be from root vegetables like potatoes, whole grains, corn, things like that. Looking for more of those whole food starches when they're available. That helps with blood sugar control, which helps with cognition and focus. When we have a evenly fed brain from the glucose in our blood, we function a little bit better. Omega-3s are incredibly important for brain health. We can get them from foods like olives, avocado, nuts, seeds, sea vegetables, dark leafy greens, and cold water fish, which if you were in Washington, we are very lucky to have a lot of things like salmon and halibut just readily available to us. Attention to soluble fiber can also be quite helpful. And these are the fibers that produce this sort of gel-like substance. So if you've ever had chia pudding and you've seen that little bubble around the chia seed, that's what I'm talking about. That's your soluble fiber, found in lots and lots of foods, not just chia seeds, but that's a visual example. And then, the not so fun thing, I hate being like the Debbie Downer about it, but alcohol is really not super helpful for our cognition and our focus. So limiting that, and I'm not here to say none, but limiting as much as works for your lifestyle. Same with refined sugar and flour. Again, this is like what's available to you, what's affordable, what's accessible. But if you have the opportunity and it's accessible to you to, add in more veggies and more fruits and reduce some of those more refined foods, that can be quite helpful in terms of inflammation, neuroinflammation, and cognition. And two things that I preach a lot to my patients is variety, mixing things up if that is accessible to you, and being flexible. Again, none of this is prescriptive. They're all things that we can add in. Okay, so just as a little background, because not everybody has taken nutrition classes in their life, when we're looking at kind of food components, these are the things I'm looking at, right? Your macronutrients, your carbs, fat, protein, your micronutrients, which are your vitamins, minerals, and bioactive compounds, that fiber, how much fluid are we getting in? And then are there any toxins that have been, kind of a part of someone's clinical history? Have we been exposed to something? Have we had an infection? Like we talked about mold before. All important things to consider. Okay, so what we're going to do now is kind of break these things down into the things that can be really helpful within those categories for focus, cognition, and brain health. So when it comes to carbohydrates, that's where energy comes from, right? We break down carbohydrates into glucose. Glucose feeds our brain. So when we're not eating enough carbohydrates, we can feel kind of sluggish, tired. People will report feeling kind of headachy. This is part of the reason why, right? So we have carbohydrates that are starchy, root vegetables, grains, corn, things like that. The non-starchy carbohydrates, which would be more of your kind of what we think of as like veggies, so like broccoli, cauliflower, but also fruits. Within starchy as well, we would throw beans and peas and legumes, though they also have a protein component. So they are a little bit of like a dual purpose, I guess. And then you have your refined forms of carbohydrate. That's your like white sugar, white flour, things like that. As able, the higher fiber options, meaning closer to like the whole food form. I don't mean the grocery store, but like as it grows in the wild, those are going to get you the most like bang for your buck in terms of fiber and nutrients, right? Refined carbohydrates, however, are a little more nutrient depleted by the refining process, and they also cause bigger shifts often in blood sugar. And that is really impactful on cognition and focus. Like I said before, if blood sugar is kind of up and down, you're swinging throughout the day, that will really, do a number on your ability to focus. And quantity and quality make a difference, right? This isn't like black or white. So, having high caloric intake from carbohydrates, and low intake of fats and proteins, right? So having that kind of balance off skew has been associated with risk for mild cognitive impairment or dementia in our elderly population. So really just trying to balance those carbs, but remembering that they are necessary. They're like the energy that your brain runs on. We got to have it. Okay. Fats. If you didn't know, your brain is primarily composed of fat. Grab a sip of water. And for cognitive function and focus, maintaining a balance of fats in the body is actually really important. We talked a little bit about omega-3s, right? And we want to balance those with our omega-6s and omega-9s. We get a lot of omega-6s and omega-9s in the kind of standard American diet, and we're a little bit lower on omega-3s. And the ratio of those is really what matters. So doing whatever is accessible to you to add in more omega-3s. Sometimes that's a supplement. If you say, don't eat fish, or none of these foods are kind of within the foods that you typically eat, right? Sometimes we need a little help there, and that's when supplements come in. When it comes to fish, there's always concerns I hear from folks about, contamination, pollution, things like that. Seafoodwatch.org is one of my favorite resources for learning about where seafood is caught and the practices and the safety of the waters that they're caught within. So I would definitely go take a peek there if that's something that concerns you. Moving away from the omegas are saturated fats. If you grew up in the 90s, like I did, saturated fats were like the big baddie, right? They were the villain, or fats in general, but especially saturated fats. We heard a lot about them. They're not the villain that they were once made out to be. We live, we learn, we know more, we do science. But we don't want to be exclusively consuming saturated fats. So getting them from our food, especially if we can get those saturated fats from really good quality foods, so things like pasture-raised, free-range, grass-fed, organic, those are all, wonderful things. They can be really cost prohibitive, though. I often tell patients, this is we do what we can kind of thing. Like we see what's on sale, what's available, what's in season, and going for like frozen options of fruits and veggies too. If organic is really important to someone, that can be more cost effective. But it's prohibitive for a lot of folks if we try to do exclusively, organic and pasture raised and grass fed and all those kind of things. So we do what we can. Also of note, you do have 4 major vitamins that need fat to be absorbed, and these are all important parts of cognition and focus and brain function. And if we're not consuming fats and in conjunction with those vitamins, we don't absorb them as effectively. And so making sure that when we're having like really good sources of some of these things, we're putting them with a little bit of fat. Fats also help you feel fuller for longer, and they're slower to digest. So, as long as you have good GI motility, they can really help with that satiety piece. The only fat that is really kind of important to avoid are the trans fats. Those have largely been removed from kind of the food system because we know they are not great for us. We do occasionally combine them in, heavily processed convenience foods, think like honey buns, out of a vending machine or something along those lines, but not even always with those too. So just watching out for those if you're in a situation where that's the food that's available to you. Okay, everybody's favorite thing to talk about these days, it seems like, is protein. So proteins are your building blocks of your neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are what help your brain function properly. So if we do not have adequate protein intake, we can't synthesize our neurotransmitters, and focus, attention, mental health can really suffer. Remember I said adequate amounts of protein. Sometimes I see people coming in who are consuming a lot of protein, and there is, again, balance to be found there. Too much protein is not great for us. Too little is not great for us. We want to find a middle ground, and working with a dietitian or a nutritionist can really help you find what works best for you. But suffice to say, if we take protein and we break it down, those building blocks are called amino acids. And those amino acids help to form neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. These are some of our happiness and focus and attention and balancing neurotransmitters, right? We need those building blocks to be able to build them. They also, amino acids provide acetylcholine, tryptophan. That helps with memory, mood regulation. Protein also helps you feel fuller and maintain, better satiety throughout the day, better blood sugar levels, like we talked about before. And you can find protein in seafood, meat, eggs, dairy, legumes, and nuts and seeds in smaller quantities. Quality, again, makes a big difference. A lot of my patients that have maybe some inflammatory issues going on, the only thing that I typically recommend avoiding are the heavily processed meats or char-grilled meats as much as possible. I mean, a burger on the 4th of July is not gonna make it or break it, but consistently having something like that, maybe grilled over charcoal, right, that can cause some issues. There's some studies on that. Okay. Just checking time. Okay, awesome. So micronutrients, these are your vitamins, minerals, bioactive compounds. They support energy production in the glial cells of your brain. They're also cofactors in that neurotransmitter synthesis with the amino acids. So again, we need all of these little smaller components as well, not just the big building blocks like the amino acids and proteins. Phytochemicals and bioactive compounds are found in plants, right? How I said at the beginning, like eating more plants can be really helpful and anti-inflammatory. It can also be neuroprotective, so helping to protect against cognitive decline and improving cognitive function. So eating more plants, if that is available to you, can be quite strategic. Vitamins and minerals are important for a number of metabolic processes, including those taking place in the brain. And anytime we have a deficiency, it can really negatively impact our ability to function. I'll give a little anecdote, personal anecdote here. I have my own sort of health journey with some autoimmune and inflammatory things. And when I first saw a rheumatologist like 15 years ago, they did all of the labs and no one had ever checked my vitamin D before. And we checked it, and amongst all the autoimmune stuff, my vitamin D was critically low, which means it's like we got to do something really quickly. Low vitamin D often kind of comes with autoimmune. It's like a little fun piggyback situation that we deal with. But at that time, I was really struggling with cognition, really struggling with focus, just felt really foggy, really out of sorts, like kind of mental exhaustion, not necessarily sleepiness. And then I got some prescription vitamin D and repleted that, and it lifted the fog significantly, right? So even something, as individualized as just a vitamin D level can make quite a difference in terms of focus, cognition. Okay. Environmental toxins. So these are some of the things that we maybe want to watch out for. Again, this is we do what we can kind of situation. We don't live in a world that is like set up for us to be able to avoid all of these things all the time. It's a privilege to be able to avoid them, and we need to be aware of that, right? Don't beat yourself up for having that burger on 4th of July or whatever it may be, right? These can disrupt brain function though, impacting mood, cognition, behavior, right? So we have these compounds called AGEs for short, or advanced glycation end products, and they are the ones that are found in those charred or char-grilled foods, the meat, the marinade, the sauce, anything that turns black, right? This is a normal part of our metabolism, but when we are consuming those things regularly and maybe kind of build up some amount of them in the body, that has been associated with cognitive decline as well as other inflammatory conditions. So those can be good things to just try to avoid as able, right? And then certain plastics, especially BPA, are known to be toxic and for the brain and your endocrine systems, your hormones. Opting for glass, metal, or ceramic vessels would, in a perfect world, that's all we would use. But this is not a perfect world, and so we do what we can. But two things that if you want to make sort of a concerted effort to avoid, thermal receipt paper has some of the highest BPA content. So when they ask you if you want your receipt at checkout, you can say no, or get that emailed receipt. And then black plastic specifically. So think of like the carryout containers, right, that have the black plastic. When that is heated above a certain temperature, it leaches some of these chemicals that are harmful to our brains and our hormones in our body. Okay. Then there's some lifestyle factors, right? I said at the beginning, first thing, dietitian, we're going to talk about food, but we also talk about all of these other things that come into play that affect our mental status, mental health. So sleep. It's kind of it's the foundation, right? If we are inadequately slept, that is associated with cognitive decline. And we know that poor sleep over a lifetime is associated with more incidents of things like dementia. And I mean, you feel it too when you've had a really crummy night of sleep and you are trying to focus. It just doesn't happen usually, right? No matter how much coffee you might drink. So trying to focus on good quality sleep is incredibly important. When we are sleeping, our glymphatic system, so a lot of people have heard of their lymphatic, we have something similar in the brain, basically cleanses your brain overnight. And it helps eliminate toxins from your central nervous system, which you can imagine if those are kind of like built up, they're having a cumulative negative impact on your nervous system, right? So sleep, it's kind of boring recommendation, but it is hugely important. And then managing stress is a huge one as well. And this is a big ask, right? Because we live in a world that is sort of built on us all living very stressed lives, right? We work a lot. We have a lot of things demanding our time and attention. But whatever works for an individual to help reduce that chronic stress, right? Whether that be yoga, meditation, breath work, time outside, doing hobbies, doing movement practices, engaging in time spent with friends and family and things like that. All of those things that help manage stress, they add up. And so, no, we can't necessarily remove the stress for most people. That, again, would be very privileged. And I don't know that anyone can really say they're free of chronic stress. But what can we do that helps reduce it? And can we bring in different pieces, different things that all cumulatively work together with the same goal of reducing stress. And then getting mental health support from a therapist or a psychiatrist, hugely important. I work with a lot of my patients to get them, if they're not already established with mental health care, we'll get them established, but also working with those providers to ensure that the care team is all on the same page and working towards the same goals with our patients. It's a big part of what I do and can be very, very impactful for sure. And different types of therapy too. I will say that a lot of my neurodivergent clients, we have to think a little bit outside of the normal kind of talk therapy, and help them get that ball rolling too. Movement, okay, doesn't have to be running or I don't know, CrossFit or anything like crazy intense. Doesn't even have to be a gym, just movement. Stimulates something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. That helps us keep our brain plastic, meaning we can kind of, old dog can still learn new tricks is the vibe there. Basically, it helps us forge new neural pathways in the brain. And that can help as we learn, as we age, as we grow, as we try to change habits or lifestyle factors. We need some neuroplasticity to be able to do that. Movement also provides us with an environment for play and mindfulness and fun and socialization, depending on, what type of movement, right? The best kind of movement is the one that you enjoy. I'm not super picky about the types of movement. We just want moving our body in ways that, one, we're able to, but also ways that help us feel better. Don't feel like punishment, don't cause pain. Gut health, also incredibly important. A healthy gut microbiome leads to better neurotransmitter synthesis, which better mental health. Most of our serotonin is actually formed in our guts. And so when we have maybe less than healthy microbiome, that can impact mood and focus as well. Our gut and brain are deeply, deeply connected. A lot of times you'll hear the gut referred to as the second brain, but they're so intrinsically linked that we can't really separate. If you're having a rough time mentally, you're likely to have something going on in the gut and vice versa, right? So digestion and absorption are super important when it comes to focus and mental health, but we have to make sure that the gut is functioning so that you can digest and absorb things, right? Sometimes food sensitivities can cause inflammation in the gut, which then kind of has a cascade effect into other parts of the body. I see a lot of folks with dysbiosis. Either they've had antibiotic treatment, or maybe they had an infection like COVID that really knocked out their gut microbiome, right? Anything like that. And sometimes, it's treating the gut to treat the mind, right? And then, like I said at the beginning, this is the fun one, is contentment. What do you do for yourself? Are you having fun? Are you playing? Are you getting into that flow state where you're sitting doing something, whatever? I'm a sewist, so maybe it's me sewing something, right? And I just am in the groove and not thinking about other things. That flow state has return benefits. It's not just helpful in that moment, but it actually helps your brain function better over time. And so finding things that are fun, that are playful, that you can get into that state, super helpful. Some people find spirituality to be kind of a piece of that puzzle, but also community as well. So, we live in a pretty lonely world where a lot of people are really individualized. So finding sources of community, whether that be, in like a movement practice, like going to say like a Pilates class or something like that, where you kind of feel like connected to the other people in the class, or, a book club, or, anything like that. Just if we need some socialization and community time. Right? Okay. Okay. So there's certain conditions that I just wanted to make sure that we specifically covered today, because they are kind of the biggest ones that I see when it comes to attention, focus, and cognition. So there are, some specific things that we want to consider and keep in mind when we are, working with someone with one of these conditions, right? So some of the ones that I see most often are that chronic stress, inflammation kind of condition, where we can kind of think of it like burnout, right? Neurodivergence, brain injuries, and then cognitive decline, so dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that. Okay, so chronic stress and inflammation. This is like everybody's biggest hurdle, I feel like, these days, right? So this comes from burnout, it comes from overwork, and comes from insufficient self-care. And that's not to blame the individual. A lot of times people just don't have the bandwidth or the accessibility for self-care. And so part of the work that I will do with people is finding the pockets where we can infuse that self-care. Inflammatory diseases as well. So Crohn's disease, for example, something like that. I see a lot of folks come in for their intake just, telling me they're kind of at their wit's end. They're so burnt out. They don't have time to cook or sleep or, go to the gym or any of those things the way that they would like to. And so we have to kind of go through some of these pieces to see what we can do to help. So one thing no one likes to hear, but where can you cut back? Right? Are there things that you can kind of let go of, right? I know I just mentioned community in a book club, but as an anecdote, I had a patient who was running a book club for a while, and it was a big task for them, and it was a big source of stress because of the sort of like interaction of the individuals in the book club. And actually letting go of that provided more room for fun and enjoyment in other areas of their life, and allowed to recover from some of the sort of like burnout feelings that they were having, right? Where can you receive support is important too. Do you have friends or family, loved ones that you can kind of lean on and let them know, hey, I'm burnout, I'm crispy, I need some support here, right? But also, support groups. There's a lot of those. I work with a lot of people who have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. There's support groups out there for that a lot of them attend that are really helpful. Also gets them some community time, right? And small practical acts of self-care, drinking more water, protecting your sleep, skipping that PTA meeting that you don't necessarily, need to go to, taking supplements as prescribed if necessary, eating regularly. That's a big one, especially if you are overworked, burnt out, exhausted, trying to make sure that you're eating on kind of a regular cadence. That's a big one for a lot of my patients. And then managing our expectations for our individual bandwidth, right? I am guilty of saying yes to everything because I want to do all of the things, but I do have to kind of reel it in for myself sometimes and be like, okay, actually, Rachel, you can't do 15 DIY projects in one weekend. We have to manage that expectation a little bit. So, whatever that looks like for the individual. And then rest. Rest is so important, and most of us don't get enough of it. And I don't just mean sleep. I mean rest, doing restful activities, chilling out. Neurodivergence. This is our other thing that we need to have some special considerations for, right? So ADHD, autism, OCD. So there's developmental structural differences in the brain with these individuals, right? It impacts communication, sensory stimulation, processing, and self-feeding capabilities, right? So systems and structures that maybe work for a neurotypical person are likely not going to work super great for a neurodivergent individual. So we have to find systems and structures that work for that individual. We have to also manage co-occurring disordered eating or eating disorders. A lot of times the sensory needs of a neurodivergent individual lead to some restriction in eating. So, an example of this would be like not tolerating, I don't know, chewy things, right? Chewy textures, right? And that can kind of like knock out a swath of foods that are available to that person. So managing those and getting the support that folks need for that, but also finding ways to get the nutrients that maybe they're missing in those foods that they're unable to tolerate. So focusing on dietary diversity with possible intolerances, aversions, disabilities as factors to work with, not against. So, trying to get diversity in the diet with the foods that are palatable, accessible, and consumable to that individual. And then targeted supplementation to kind of fill in any gaps, right? So for a lot of my neurodivergent individuals, omega-3s are really important. Sometimes we will use adaptogens to help support stress levels. Saffron is one that has been shown for ADHD specifically to really help with focus, though dosage just needs to be quite high, and that can be cost prohibitive for folks. Saffron is quite an expensive herb. And there are certain probiotics that actually help support like serotonin production in the gut. And so sometimes if we're healing some dysbiosis, once we get to a good place with that, we might try to sort of install some microbes that are specifically helpful for their condition, right? And then obviously coordinated care with psychiatrist, therapist, OT, PT, whatever that individual needs, so that we're all on the same page and can help the individual together. Brain injuries. So concussions, traumatic brain injuries, or stroke is generally what we're talking about. This can impact appetite. It can impact digestion, chewing and swallowing abilities, self-feeding abilities. Think about if you have a stroke and you have, say, one side of your body that is paralyzed, and that side is your dominant side, and you have to learn how to hold a fork or a spoon with your non-dominant hand and feed yourself, right? And you can imagine it goes further than that. That's just an example. The most important thing, especially immediately after a brain injury, but moving forward, is making sure that energy needs are met, right? So are we getting enough to eat on a regular, consistent basis? A lot of times with these folks working with PT, so physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy is incredibly important for helping with feeding environment and food textures, because swallowing and chewing can be quite difficult sometimes. And this is a slow process for a lot of people healing from a brain injury. And what we kind of, the benchmarks are just gradual changes over time. So we have to be really patient. If we have the brain injury, being really patient with ourselves, but if we're caring for a loved one or someone in our life that has had a brain injury, being very patient and very supportive is incredibly important. And then as we're able to, establishing habits that support regular intake, increase variety, and more autonomy with feeding. As we know, sometimes with certain brain injuries, we kind of hit a progress limit in terms of functionality, maybe with a limb or something like that. And once we hit that point, what is the system that is going to help that individual be able to eat regularly, feed themselves, nourish themselves so that they can use their brain, focus, have attention, be present, and, live as best a life as possible, right? And then oftentimes omega-3s are incredibly important for brain health. And then the last condition would be some form of cognitive decline. So dementia or Alzheimer's are our primary that we know. And as memory declines, so can self-feeding abilities, and with memory also focus. So for example, one of the memory care units that I used to support, we would have, say, 2 or 3 folks at a table for dinner with an aide. But sometimes the focus ability isn't there. And so we need that aid to be supportive to sort of redirect and remind whoever we're working with, like, hey, don't forget, you still have half your burger here or whatever it may be, and setting up the eating environment to be supportive in that way, right? And as we don't have cures for dementia or Alzheimer's, this is like a slow and steady kind of decline situation, and needs have to be adjusted as we go, right? For kind of slowing that decline and helping support the individual with focus, attention, and cognition on sort of a daily basis, creatine can actually be effective, 5 milligrams a day. It's a relatively flavorless powder that you mix into a drink, and that has some really promising studies showing slowing that rate down. Managing stress, again, this is incredibly important for all of us, but especially if we have a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, stress can make that significantly worse and prevent an individual, maybe like reducing their appetite, prevent them from eating in some sort of way, right? Consistency is key, especially as we kind of are in, maybe we're still at home, right? Not in sort of a memory care unit or something like that. Making sure that routine and consistency is there and that there are structures in place. And that really helps the focus part because we have it set up for success, right? And then allowing for liberalization of diet with weight loss, poor appetite, or development of aversions or hyperfixations. And what that means is, if somebody, say, an 85-year-old individual with Alzheimer's develops an aversion to something they've been drinking for 20 years, like coffee, for example, finding a suitable alternative and not necessarily worrying as much in that environment about like the, I guess, sort of health food aspect of things, right? Okay, wrapping up, I have 3 kind of key takeaways. What can we do now? Like leaving today, what are the things that can be helpful for you? Infusing your diet with more plants in all forms, if that's accessible and available to you, is a great way to help improve cognition and focus and attention. Prioritizing rest, sleep, and fun. Making an effort to maintain sleep hygiene and schedules and do things that bring you joy, right? That is hugely helpful. And then seek support. Coordinate care with your primary care, your naturopath, your dietitian, specialist, all the things, right? So that we can all work together to develop a simple and sustainable and effective plan that works for you. When you have a coordinated care team that are all on the same page, it makes all the difference. Let me tell you, all the difference. Just a little bit about our practice in case you are interested in booking with me or one of our other dietitians or nutritionists. We do accept insurance. We're in network with all of these providers and more, and most insurance companies cover nutrition counseling as preventative care at 100% or a low copay. We are located in Washington, but we also serve clients in all of the states listed there. You can scan that QR code or just go to our website if you'd like to book an appointment or talk to someone on our team and learn more about us. So, all right. Well, thank you for watching, and feel free to reach out with any questions, concerns, or if you are interested in seeking some individualized support for your brain health, cognition, and attention. Bye-bye.